إله إلا الله الله أكبر محمد رسول الله يا حبيب الله.
Yep, another video on the religion of Islam. I know it was hard to tell, what with the intro and all, but rather than a response video to some wild assertions about Allah, or how the ontological argument proves the God of the Quran, this video is aimed at detailing what is meant by Sharia law, which is definitely a topic that has been popping up all over the place. The news, YouTube, and especially Twitter. Cancerous fucking Twitter. Opinions on the topic are plentiful. Some people seem to think that Sharia is primed to gain a foothold in the Western world, a replacement for more secular forms of law. While on the other side of the political spectrum are people who contend that criticism of the religious dogma is racist and bigoted. I find that, like many things, the subject is a bit more nuanced, as I think that race and religion are not synonyms, and religion shouldn't be shielded from criticism by yelling bigot. Nor do I think Sharia law is adequately understood by many of its detractors, or for that matter its white knighting proponents. Besides being Islam's prescribed religious law, there is some ambiguity as to what exactly Sharia law entails, what its origins are, its current application, and the overall incongruity with more secular forms of governance or jurisprudence. And while the debate rages, or more likely retweets, I thought I would take the time to do a bit of research and give my thoughts. So first, we'll start with some of the facts, to help us make an informed opinion. And it would probably be most helpful to know, what is Sharia? Simply put, it's a theocratic body of law as distilled from the Islamic religion. Its origins go back nearly 1400 years and is primarily derived from the teachings credited to the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Since its introduction to Muslim culture, it has been regarded by many Muslims, in its different versions, as the highest legal authority or as an embodiment of God's laws. Its authority typically only applies to believers or adherents of Islam, though not always, as we'll discuss later. The application of Sharia law generally falls into two categories. One set of rules that governs the observance of Islamic rituals, and another set of rules for social or civil matters. Within this framework, any action a human being could make would be described, through understanding of the sacred texts, as mandatory, encouraged, neutral, detestable, or forbidden. The censures or punishments carried for perceived transgressions, things either detestable or forbidden, such as the highly forbidden act of apostasy, or the rejecting of Allah, has varied under different interpretations of Sharia law and in different regions, but has included brutal murder as a punishment, and still does in some countries, though to the extent these punishments are carried out or what methods are used is often debated. Also worth noting is that in most current Muslim-majority countries, Sharia law is present in some form. Either it is embraced and codified by the official law of the land, such as in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Afghanistan, or, as in Libya, Sharia law is relegated to more civil or religious matters with separate Sharia courts presiding over those disputes and criminal courts presiding over criminal cases. Though even then, much of the criminal code is still based on or makes reference to regional interpretations of Sharia law. Countries like Bangladesh have Sharia-based proceedings that are handled through the normal court system, which are used to settle divorces and property inheritance within Muslim families. In many cases, the Sharia courts act more akin to arbitration, a legally binding meeting between accuser and accused with an acting judge making the final decision, without mediation by legal counsel or lawyers, without a jury of peers, a court where verbal testimony is one of the highest forms of evidence, and the judgment then rendered is based on the judge's understanding of precedents interpreted from ancient religious doctrine. You may notice I've mentioned the word interpretation more than once, and that's because while some of the theocratic law of Islam is considered indisputable, there are some points of contention, even in the Muslim world, as to some of the details, including the hudud, or punishment for certain crimes. Many people think that the Quran, the Islamic holy book which contains the teachings of Muhammad, is the source for Sharia. This is not untrue, but as an answer it is incomplete. The Quran, which was put together from oral accounts by Muhammad's followers, contains many chapters or surahs that deal with prescribed types of behavior and moral commandments imparted by Allah, some that are quite explicit on certain matters. But Sharia law, in most traditions, is established by way of studying the Quran as well as studying the Hadith, which are a vast collection of teachings and traditions attributed to Muhammad and those close to him, then analyzing these two sets of religious source materials for a precedence, and finally attempting to come to a juridical consensus on what is to become canon law. What is canon law can differ between the different Islamic traditions, such as the Sunni and Shia Muslims, and the countries in which the Sharia law is being interpreted. In Iran and Lebanon, under Sharia law, it's still acceptable to marry children, while most of the other Islamic countries have changed their laws to be more in line with Western values. In Saudi Arabia, under Sharia law, anyone identified as LGBT can be sentenced to death, as opposed to some other countries where it may mean only a jail sentence. In most Muslim-majority countries, apostasy is seen as one of the highest forms of treason, and under Sharia law, is treated as such. You may be thinking to yourself that these terrible things aren't what all Muslims want. And you'd be right. Many of the Muslims throughout the world do struggle for a modernization of the laws in their lands. However, there are large sectors of the Islamic faith that want laws in their nations to reflect more closely those of Sharia. This Pew Research poll suggests as much. And while a vast number of Muslims do want to see some change in the law, or at least some move away from it, the die-hard fundamentalists and their strict observance of classic Sharia is the view I most oppose. Vehemently. Some of the most damning criticisms heaved against Sharia are its encouraging of human rights violations, such as the treatment of LGBT persons, the degradation of women, the disallowing of freedom of religion, and though not all of these things are unique to Islam as religious laws go, the fact that many are supported by modern theocratic governments is more than a little alarming. In fact, it's terrifying. Under many versions of Sharia law, defection from Islam is punishable by death, even if not consistently enforced. In fact, it's illegal to proselytize other religions in many of these countries for fear of leading Muslims astray. Not freely allowing one's citizens to choose what religion to follow is the denial of a basic human right, one I hold dear. Many more moderate Muslims have tried to bring change to apostasy laws in this regard, which I fully support. Another issue that I have is that in many Muslim countries, despite the law supposedly applying only to Muslims, when children are born to Muslim families, they are by that fact considered Muslim, without any say, and are from birth subject to Sharia. Their religion is presupposed, and they are unable to leave it in many cases without severe punishment. Being born to a belief system or slave to an idea or religion in this way is beyond criminal. And if you think a fair trial awaits people that are accused, then you're kidding yourself. There are no lawyers or jurors, no preliminary investigations or collection of evidence pre-trial, just the accused and the accuser, relying mostly on oral testimony to convince a judge of who is truthful. And in most cases, the testimony of women is considered subordinate to that of a man, an idea drawn straight from the Islamic scriptures. And this all takes place in a legal framework where there is no say whatsoever of the common person in the drafting of their own laws, or in the kinds of punishments imposed. They are often decided by religious scholars, people who are not voted into an office. In Sharia courts, no precedents are ever set or updated. Every judgment stands on its own and must be connected back to the original Islamic scriptures.
Of course it's not the case that every thief has their hand lopped off in Muslim society, or every adulterer gets stoned, and so on. I'm perfectly sure that's not just because it would diminish the labour force so radically, or so to speak, disable it. I think it's more because of something I've claimed to notice elsewhere, which is that religion is man-made. And so there are enormous discrepancies in how these things are promulgated and also how they are enforced. Most countries and societies come quite early and easily to the conclusion that their own religions are, in one form or another, not really practicable.
Could this ancient body of law ever affect Western nations with established secular legal systems? Well, even in countries where Western democratic law prevails, such as the UK, Sharia courts have made some headway, though the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal is considered primarily a corporate arbitration group, and the Islamic Sharia Council make rulings on Islamic family matters that aren't compulsory or legally binding as much as they are voluntary, but in the context of a theologically supported court, the compulsion to comply is real enough. To a believer, these are God's laws, and they probably want to follow them. It bypasses the legal system of the country and isn't subject to the government oversight in the way that a true legal system would be. To me, it undercuts democratic law. Period. Though in response, it has been said that Sharia is just a private expression of belief. If that's true, then in many countries they already have the ability to express that, such as with Mosaic law or Leviticus law. It's interpretational and of course subject to the laws of whichever nation you find yourself in, but you can do whatever traditions are called for by your religion as long as they aren't illegal. Will it gain a foothold in America? Probably not. But it has been considered in some states when dealing with family disputes in Muslim communities by state courts. Some states, however, have banned its use, as many legislative bodies feel it is utterly at odds with our legal system. And that's the real problem, I think. Many of the behaviors found to be terrible in most forms of Sharia aren't seen that way by modern Western societies, and the punishments for these transgressions are also seen by many of us to be orders of magnitude more horrid than what is called for. In our Western countries, Sharia law being practiced or allowed represents a potential inability for Muslim communities to integrate into the moral framework of the larger society. The fact that these laws are theological, similar to biblical laws, means that they aren't subject to rewriting or repeal. Unlike biblical or Judaic laws, however, Sharia laws have for much of their long history existed in a vacuum, with no real change or evolution, as being too vocal about questioning them, as a non-scholar, would be heresy. They are largely untouchable, being subject to laws one has no say in, and in fact laws that deny basic human rights is beyond fucked up. To be clear, I think the Judaic and biblical laws are clearly archaic and outmoded attempts at rules of law as well, and theocracies of those religions would be pretty damn scary too. But Sharia is trapped in the Dark Ages. In the end, Muslims are the primary victims of this, and they have very little say in the matter. And even if I don't show up to march about it, know that I think it's garbage. Sharia law is trash, and it's not compatible with the Western world's current view of human rights. Laws need to be able to be changed, improved, not locked in the distant past beyond reproach. And we need to be able to discuss these things without being labeled as racist. At least, that's my opinion. But what do you guys think? Were there things about Sharia that you didn't know, or had gotten wrong? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. It means a lot. Next time, maybe a less serious vid. You guys have yourselves a science-tastic day.